We are very glad to have three amazing set of speakers in open source. We all know open source is getting a hot wave in this ecosystem, and we feel open source want to encourage innovation through collaborations. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite our general partner Arjun Rao, who will be moderating the session.
Good morning, everyone. Super excited to be here this Monday morning for another edition of Speciale Talks. It's a series of talks that we do with typically early stage founders in the SaaS enterprise software ecosystem, right? To learn about what they're building, to learn about the ecosystem, to learn about latest trends, and to share that with the rest of the audience, right? Just to give a little background, we at Speciale Invest are an early stage pre-seed seed fund focused on what we call deep technology ideas. We invest in enterprise software SaaS, which includes dev tools, open source, conversational AI, sales tech, variety of vertical and horizontal tech areas. And then we invest in frontier tech, deep tech, which usually involves hardware engineering areas such as space technology, robotics, quantum, and many other emerging areas of technology. We're based out of Bangalore and Chennai and deploying out of a $40 million fund now, our second fund, typical check size of about $500,000. Really want to be the first institutional investor, right? So working very closely with entrepreneurs and operators in this ecosystem, right? And bringing Speciale talks to you in an effort to add value to the rest of the ecosystem, right? So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce today's topic. We're talking about the open source landscape, how open source as a philosophy, as an ecosystem has developed over many, many years. And particularly in the recent past has become a very, very important approach of how startups are building their companies, right? In the open source world, they're using it as a community strategy. They're using it as a go-to-market strategy. They're using it as a way to build their product. Right? And that is a super exciting phase that we're all in. And to talk about that, we have three founders that are deep into this ecosystem, that are building their early stage startups in open source, with open source, for open source, if I may say so, right? Super excited to invite and have today on the panel Harini, who's co-founder, CEO at Roi. They're building a platform that enables open source approach to solving for data management on top of spreadsheets and things for various use cases. Harini, you can talk more about it, about the startup. Super warm welcome for you, and thanks for joining us from Sydney.
Yeah, thanks, and great to be here. I can give a quick introduction about myself if it's useful. So yeah, Roi is, we are building Roi is an open source low code platform for building your product backend, and it's a tool that's focused on developer productivity. My background is in engineering. I was previously VP of data engineering at BlackRock. We have worked in with a lot of open source technologies there. And previously I was also a partner in a venture capital firm. So got to work with a lot of technical founders, and Roi is a product that we are solving from our experience working with technical founders and developers and using open source.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Harini, and welcome once again. Our second guest and speaker on the panel, Navneet, who's building his latest company out of Bangalore and India. All right, Navneet, super warm welcome to you. Please talk about what you're building, and very excited to have you on the panel.
Thanks, Arjun, and hi everyone. So I'm Navneet. I'm the founder of Tooljet. So what we're trying to build is a low-code framework for building applications. And right now we started off with building internal tools. So we started just about 1 year ago. I think exactly 1 year ago. And right now we are a team of 16 people working remotely and working out in the public. That's about me.
Super exciting to have you as well. Welcome once again, Navneet. Right, and our third speaker and panelist, Jos is founder at Aviel. He's building an interesting platform that enables, I think, is that going to be an enabler for the open ecosystem is what I could, is one way I could put it. Jos, over to you to just talk about yourself, what you've done, and what you're building at Aviel.
Hey, thanks, and super excited to be here. So I'm a second-time entrepreneur. My last startup was a fintech / SaaS play, which was acquired by Paytm. So coming back to build Aviel. I would say like Arjun mentioned, like we are in the shovel business, as in like, when open source takes off, like, people need tools, right? So we are sort of in that business, helping more and more projects to scale and use their community, right? So what we realized, open source, I mean, it's day zero community, right? A lot of people, but still don't use it. The 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 uh, the way they scale community and the way they make sure that it's being engaged properly, it's not really happening. So that's where we come to play. We are building this entire OS for open source community scale, like right from analyzing what's happening. We source data from multiple places, then sort of build Incentivize mechanism and building engagement for them, right? So that's what we focus on. We are still early stage. We have around like 10 projects on our platform which we are helping them to scale, right? So that's mostly about us. We can definitely go and talk about what we learned and how we help projects.
Awesome, Jose. Thank you so much. And once again, super welcome to you as well and all the other speakers. We'll dive right in. And what I want to start with is a little bit of history, if you may will, right? To talk about, just define open source a little bit for the audience, right? At least in your own opinion, what is open source? What is the uniqueness of open source? And how that has evolved? What have you seen and why that has led you to build your business in open source? All right. Just talk a little bit about history and what you see as, the definition of open source. Harini, if you can start with you.
Yeah, so open source, everybody kind of understands that in the sense that the code is open source, the value that you create for the community is open source in the sense that, there are tons of projects out there that people use day to day, from NPM packages to code snippets and things that you find on GitHub. So that's kind of at the core of open source where value creation happens. And then open core or businesses that are built on top of it. There are tons of successful examples like Elastic, Confluent, which has built on Kafka, HashiCorp and whatnot. So that's where possibly the value capture happens, where companies are building to continue supporting that ecosystem with monetization models and hosted versions and whatnot. So, this model is obviously continuously evolving and has been in place for such a long time that now tons of more open source companies are evolving, and it's always great to see that.
Yep, awesome. Navneet, your take on what you've seen evolve and how you got into open source, maybe, right? Something will be very useful for the audience to listen to.
Got it. So I think open source started as free and open source, but after a while, people started seeing a lot of value in extending the frameworks or projects. So people started paying the maintainers to customize the projects according to their needs. So that's how the companies like, let's say, Red Hat came in, like they were selling support services. And in the next generation, a lot of SaaS companies came in. For example, we have GitLab. They do have an open source project, and they also have a paid product. So it's more like a SaaS model. And right now, what we're seeing is that a lot of companies are moving on to on-premise first projects. In our case, Tooljet is built to deploy on premises instead of SaaS. So we are seeing another wave of, let's say, evolution happening here.
Very interesting. So you're saying there is not just only purely cloud / SaaS open source projects, but projects and companies that are focused on on-prem software also.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. What's your take on this? What you've seen as evolution of in your career, evolution of open source. Why did it start, and why is it such a big deal today?
No, see, I think okay. I'll take a step back. See, unlike these two guys, I'm not a maintainer. So my supervisor actually, I had at least before starting Avial, I spent around like 6 months talking to more than 100 plus maintainers, and like spend at least with 2 maintainers like almost for 2 weeks. So that's mostly my learning, and then working with 10 projects in our last 8 months, right? So for me, and the ticker for me was while our previous startup, we were actually implementing this D3 library, and we want this particular feature, and it was almost impossible. This is such a widely known or like such a popular project, but still it took us almost 6 weeks to actually make a small delta, right? So that was sort of the trigger. Then we spoke to a lot of the maintainers. I had a couple of friends who were maintainers, so for me, it's sort of irony, and I think pretty sure actually you guys also went through it. Like when the open source project takes off, that's a point where actually the pain start for the maintainer, right? Because it's, I mean, from your normal life, it just, you know, like, you know, you get like avalanche of incoming requests, and they all expect you to actually do it, you know, like for free, or like, you know, in your own time, right? So that has been our learning. So we thought actually, see, open source is fantastic, but the value system is still very much lopsided. So that's where we thought actually, you know, I mean, you know, having getting the community part of, you know, your overall you know, growth can be fantastic, right? And open source is like day zero, like, you know, I mean, if you talk about all the things you talk, I mean, you see like building in public, or, you know, making part of community, right? I mean, open sort of, you know, I would say like optimize almost all these things. And so for me, open is actually like all these guys mentioned, it's about community, it's about, like, you know, I mean, building along with the folks, right? So why I think people are going with open source. One, there's a definitely change in the way enterprise adopting software, right? So, you know, right now developers, I had this classic example from a VP at Okta, where they were selling, they already sold this, you know, single sign-on to a customer, but you know, they were not using it on their website. So, you know, they had this call with the entire team, and the developers said, actually, we already use open source tool to actually do that, right? But you guys already paid for it, right? So that was the thing, right? So open, I mean, developers love to experiment. They would actually love to, like, you know, sit on sandbox, play it around, and just, you know, push it out, right? So the adoptions, like the way enterprise adopting open source, that has changed. I mean, that's been happening for, I would say, like last 5-10 years, and open source sort of hits right, I mean, sits right in the middle of that. Then community is always has been powerful, and now, you know, like people realize, like, you know, I mean, having community is a superpower, right? So, you know, open source sort of sit both, I mean, you know, in the overlap between both those things. So I think for me, that has been inspiration. That's my, you know, like learning so far.
Got it. Got it. No, very interesting of, you know, why enterprises have started using this a little more because of how developers mindset behaves, right? Harini, coming to you, particularly with your, you know, prior experience, you worked at a very large organization, BlackRock, but probably were big customer of open source, right? So you saw open source from very different vantage point, right, as opposed to, you know, most of others do, right? So just want to understand from that experience, what did you take away? How did such a large organization like BlackRock become an open source adopter and then a customer, correct? Did you drive that change? What was that trigger point? And that also seems like a few years ago, right? So from then to today, what's happening? Just if you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So, you know, at BlackRock, as part of this open source committee, because, you know, at BlackRock, they use tons of open source technologies as a user mainly. So, you know, we use things like Storm, Kafka, and whatnot. And effectively, eventually, they also become like donors for the Linux Foundation because they want to contribute back. But there are, you know, large organizations also have a lot of policies around how you can contribute and which projects you can contribute to. And so licensing also becomes a key player in that scenario, where some licenses, you know, currently like license is also a hot topic in the open source world, where which license to adopt and so on. So, you know, if you're building it truly in open source, a project that has actual inclusive license of using it in a way that large organizations can start using it without a lot of hurdles. And then those organizations also contribute back in different ways. So yeah, that's kind of at BlackRock how we started using, and you know, obviously that has evolved since, and BlackRock has its own open source projects now. And from my experience, you know, it's just you know, any developer using any kind of open source, you know, JavaScript framework or anything like that, it's the norm. So there's no way to build things without open source, be it like some component or some module from somewhere. And so like evolution of open source companies and evolution of open source projects is a natural thing. And you know, the contribution to open source projects also has various levels. So the communities that get formed around it get started as a developer using the project, but then if you're contributing back to the project, it can be a casual contributor because you possibly just, you know, making some documentation change or some kind of like minor extensions contribution. And also it can be a core contributor where you actually shaping the evolution of the project. And I saw some interesting survey around this where they surveyed like 300 odd open source project, and only about 80% of that projects have core contributors in the single digits kind of thing, even though they might have large communities. So it becomes like a evolution where your open source project, even though they might have large community, who are the core contributors, who are the casual contributors. So these are some of the aspects that open source projects have to go through and think about.
Got it. Interesting. I think how large organizations are adopting as well as giving back seems to be a critical, move in the industry that is helping the open source expansion. We may think that way. And like you rightly said, seems like everybody is using open source in some form or shape, right? I don't think there's a tech organization in the world that is not touched by open source, right? So that is a very important thing. Navneet, your own take on this, right? Why did you decide to build, whatever you're building a tooljet, right, in the open source approach, right? What do you think are the biggest advantages? And do you worry about certain things that while you build a startup that you want to create value and capture value yourself, open source may have some downsides or risks, or what are those? Any thoughts on that?
Got it. So the major advantage is that you get to work with a very large community. So let's say we are building it as a closed source tool. Not a lot of people discover it, but if you're building for a developers and if it's an open source project, the developers will easily discover it. So that helped us a lot in getting a lot of people to know about tooljet. So that's one of the advantages. And the other thing is that we get a lot of contributors. For example, someone starts using the product, then they find it very interesting. They find that some feature is missing or they find a bug. They contribute back to the repository. So in this way, it has been very helpful for us. And the downside is that we have to draw a line somewhere. Like if it is not commercial, then the project is not sustainable. So there should be a lot of value in the open source project so that people try it out and they use it regularly. And at the same time, there should be a point or a feature for which they are ready to pay. So otherwise, it won't be sustainable. Like we'll be running out of funds after a while. So that's the good and bad sides.
Got it. And just in the interest of the audience understanding, can you throw some light on when you started, right, and how small was it? Was it completely your project, and then you got a community involved? Just a little bit about the early days of Tooljet in the open source.
Sure. So when I started Tooljet, I was the only person on the team. So I was the developer, I was the designer, and I was the one who was sending emails to investors. So this was almost 1 year ago, and at the time I was planning to build something within 2 to 3 months, and I mean that's the bank balance I had. So that was the plan. So I managed to build the first beta version of Tooljet within, let's say, 2 months and 1 week, and until then I was the only person on the team. And right after the launch, it actually went pretty well. Like we launched on Hacker News, we got our first 1,000 stars on GitHub within just 8 hours. So that managed to create a community. Like there were around 20 or 30 people within the first week of launch. I mean, we have a Slack community. And right now we have grown to around 650 people on the Slack community. And we have also grown to a team of 16, and we have more than 150 contributors and close to 10,000 stars right now. So that's the journey in short.
Very interesting. Those are some very interesting numbers, and also, an interesting point for me to go to Joe's about how, Navneet has built the community, and Joe, you're building Avial to enable, easier building of these communities, and then continuing to keep them engaged for people like Navneet, I would assume, right? And many others. So just talk about specifically community building, right? How should somebody leverage on that? How should a new contributor or a new, maintainer think about community building from scratch, as well as building on top of existing communities?
Yeah. So before just jumping into that question, just like this is something I keep doing. Like I'm sort of, like the voice that amplifies maintainer's voice, right? So just to give you a context, Navneet's project Tooljet, that's like you guys are part of the ROS index, right? I mean, has grown almost, I think, 1,000% last year. So just to give clarity, like that's I mean, tools is actually one of the fastest growing projects that's been tracked on Runa Index, right? I mean, that's fantastic.
Brilliant.
I mean, back to the question. So I think what we learned talking to a lot of the successful maintainers, and in our first 6 months of journey, we spoke to a lot of the people who actually even IPO'd, CEOs of open source projects, and people who actually have made successful projects but haven't taken money, right? Two patterns sort of evolve. One, on day zero itself, they focus on community. So they make sure there is a layer other than the core maintainers who actually actively work with them, right? So right now, I think he even said, actually, I mean, 10 years back there was no DevRel. I mean, that's not even a term. So I mean, we used to be the DevRel, right? So and we figure out actually people who can be DevRels, right? So that was always a thing, like get sort of the ambassadors who can work with the community, right? The second bit is actually evangelism. So there was at least most of the success projects 10 years back or 5 years back, there's at least one core member whose full-time job is to go out, be in panels like this, or go to developers and talk about, hey, you guys are, like, we are building something, like, why don't you just take a look at it and get the feedback, right? So these are two things we thought we could help the communities with. So our platform on high level, we focus on three things. One, we have a community dashboard. It's a same shameless pitch, but I'm just letting you know how we work. So we have a community dashboard, which sort of helps the maintainers understand who are the right sort of people to reach out to, and we already have this preset filters which we got from the feedback from maintainers. These are things we look at, right? So they can identify the who are right set of people. They can reach out directly from the platform. So right now we source data from GitHub, Twitter, RVL, and we also have Discord and Slack. So that's coming in pipe. So fundamentally at top level, very actionable insights, who are the right sort of people to reach out to. Second, we have a small community team who help identifying these people and sort of create engagement path them, right? So this can be like knowledge share, this can be content pieces, right? So initially, before we prioritizing it, the community team was reaching out to them, helping them with that bit. And the third bit is actually how do we get them to come back for more things? So events, one aspect of it. Second thing, we are also have this task board. So it's still we are shipping out the, I mean, right now it's still a Notion sheet. We're shipping out the protest version 2 weeks from now. So what it does, community can actually come from different, I mean, so we get the tasks from different places, like GitHub issues, even Upwork, right? Where actually community can come get, I mean, some of them are free, some of them are paid, right? So aggregating the demand and supply around the community, right? Around the project. So that's what we have done. What we have been very successful is around evangelism. So we had around 1,000 plus original content pieces that's been created on the platform, and events has been all successful. We had around I think 150 plus events with more than I think 10K people coming back, right? So we make sure people, we so the from a project perspective, we help them, hey, these are basic things you should do, right? Community roadmap, contributor call. People need to know you guys are doing stuff, right? And they need to you need to incorporate their feedback, right? Because that is the most powerful thing for community. I mean, for open source, because the rate at which you can iterate, getting the feedback directly from community, that's really hard, right? If you have a closed source thing, you have to reach out to people and get feedback. Now the information is coming directly to you. You just have to prioritize and get along, right? So that has been our journey so far, and I think it's working out. So because we're getting a lot of incoming requests, so we have around 25 plus projects waiting in our funnel to get onboarded. So I think that sort of talks about the approach we have.
Very cool, very cool. I think one thing that is recurring is, how do you engage a community, build on top of it for you to first step get as many contributors as possible, right? I think number of contributors seems to be a very key metric and a key target to go after. Any thoughts, Harini and Navneet, right, on what drives contributors to join a project? Right? What is motivations and inherent reasons, right? And of course, the project maintainers and other people like Aviel, etc., might be helping with evangelism, right? But want to understand inherent motivations for a developer to join a project, because there are thousands of projects out there, right? And how does a developer, either a new developer or an experienced developer, decide to join a new project, right? Just would love to hear those thoughts. Harini, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So yeah, going back to the question, like essentially, if specifically if you're building a developer tool, no, it doesn't matter if your audience, if you're say building a marketing tool or operation tool targeting those audiences, it doesn't matter if the project is open source or not, because they're just looking to solve their problem. But say, especially if you're building a developer tool, like at ROI, we are building something that allows you to build your product back and similar to like a no code, but then fully extended at code anytime you need. And it's a developer tool. So essentially, developers can come in, start using the product and continue to build and scale without limits. So if such a tool, if you're going for a closed source project, it's not ideal for a developer to select, at least from my experience, if there's such a product that I'm looking for, and if there's a closed source and open source, naturally developers tend to gravitate towards the open source, and you first become a developer user for the product, and then you start building on top of it, and then effectively say, suppose you want to contribute back, and that's the natural progression for someone to get involved with the project. And then once you are more and more get involved with the project, you can start contributing at various levels, basics, extensions, and small kind of code snippets here and there, to a more deeply getting involved in community calls, or like even at the core level, maybe becoming part of the code contributor list. So as a developer, say there are tons of Discord communities for various types of projects. You can get started there, or I'm really wanting to explore Aviel. So there are a lot of opportunities in the space for getting involved in an open source project. You can start looking for things like good first issues. Almost every open source project has that as a way for you to get started and build up your understanding of the project and go from there.
Got it. Very interesting. Navneet, your thoughts. You said you have 150 contributors today, right? But as an organization, you have 16 full-time employees or something in that range, right? Did you go out looking for specific type of contributors for your project somewhere along the way, or they came in through their interest by themselves along the way, or did you pick and choose? Any thoughts on that, right? As a maintainer and a builder of a project, do you also have specific target contributors in your mind?
Got it. So there are different types of people who contribute. There are people who just want to add it to their portfolio. There are people who are users and they want to add to the platform. And then there are other users who want to customize the platform for their own needs. Okay, so these are the different type of contributors. And the issue with open source projects is that it gets complicated every day. Like maybe after 3 or 4 years, toolset will be a very complicated code base for someone to contribute to, right? So we are trying to tackle this issue by making the platform very modular. Like every part of toolset can be extended using plugins. And what that means is that if someone want to contribute, let's say a connector for toolset, they don't need to go to the code base at all. So we have a plugin system that the developers can use to extend the framework itself. So I think that's an important aspect for open source, because developers tend to not contribute to repositories that are very complicated or that are not very easy to contribute to. And for this purpose, we also create issues that are not very large issues, and we mark it as good first issues, so that people who want to start with contributing, they can start with those issues. So we have to make that barrier very low.
So I'm hearing the first issues as an approach for key contributors to join, as well as for you to find the filter through and get the right contributors for the right enhancement of the project seems to be very critical, right? From a tools perspective or from a platform's perspective, other than GitLab or GitHub, things like that, any other core places that you do spend most of your time in trying to evangelize and finding and working with contributors, right? And you can throw more light on it as well later. But Navneet, just to begin with you, where are you spending most of your time and energy on?
Got it. So for every open source project, the community is really important. And the community actually comes from what stack you're using for the product. For example, if you're using JavaScript or Python, then the community is very large. But if you're using something like Java or Haskell or something like that, the communities are very small or not very active. I mean, the number of members are very less. So that part is very important. Actually, we first built Tooljet with Ruby as the backend, but after a while, we ported everything into JavaScript. So we wanted to leverage that community, and that was the reason behind that. And to answer your question, we spent a lot of time on Reddit. So that's somewhere a lot of developers hang out. So we have communities like r slash JavaScript, web dev, self-hosted, etc. So these are the places where people actively discuss about open source projects. So that helped us a lot in discovery.
Understood. Understood. Harini, from a tools perspective, your go-to tools, what are you using already, and what do you think you will have to use going forward? Of course, you mentioned a few, but anything else that comes to mind that you want to highlight?
Right. So no, we are connected to our platform. Roi is connected to databases as well as cloud platforms. So we kind of also look at those communities as a way for us to engage with those groups. So we are deeply building on the Firebase ecosystem. So that's a natural community that we hang out with. So as Navneet mentioned, so we are part of the subreddit on Firebase, and also we use a bunch of awareness creation kind of strategies around content, so posting different blogs and articles on Medium and other places. So most of our community is on Discord otherwise, and there's also like a Firebase Discord that we hang out with, and collaborating with Firebase DevRels is another thing we do on Twitter.
Got it. Got it. I think Joseph has gone offline, but we'll get him back soon. Right. Yeah. So the other point that we want to talk about is, of course, both of you, Rohi and the Tooljet, are in the earlier stages. Tooljet may have more progress, but just curious to say, how do you think about tipping points, right? And maybe Joseph mentioned earlier, a certain point when a project becomes suddenly super popular or breaks out, and then they have a problem maintaining, managing it. And Navneet also mentioned when project becomes large, it becomes complex, and therefore it's not easy for new contributors to come in, right? So just for understanding, are there ranges, some metrics, some key numbers that makes it a breakout, right? Which is a tipping point for the project, right? Or what are you targeting both within your organizations, projects?
Yeah, so I can. Oh.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, we are, when we launched Roi, before that, effectively, we're building and doing this on the side, open source, and solving a problem for ourselves. So before we started building a company on top of it, so effectively, when we actually launched, say, on Product Hunt and other places, there was this huge, increase in kind of adoption, and so, to front page of Hacker News multiple times, Reddit, and Product Hunt itself. So. Beyond all those vanity metrics, the tipping point effectively are when actually people are using in production, and big companies and significant startups are starting to use and actually solving real problems. So, and that's what we've seen in some of our core early adopters, and that's where things start to become more exciting. So that's where we are, what we are pushing for adoption of people using it in startups, or like people building it and launching their products and effectively continuing to scale using Roi.
Interesting. Navneet, your thoughts on this, and particularly picking on Harini's last point, do you focus on small companies to be adopters? Do you focus on mid-sized companies or enterprises? Is there a flavor? Do you prefer one over the other, and why? Right? I'm assuming you would have a mix of these as part of the broader community that you are managing and engaging with, right? So what have you experienced and what are you focusing on?
Right. So I don't really have an answer to the question. So that's mostly because Tooljet is a generic platform, and anyone can use it. I mean, it can be someone who doesn't have any coding experience, or it can be some experienced developer at a very large organization. So we have seen some patterns, like a lot of people from regulated industries like finance and healthcare, they see a lot of value in a self-hosted low-code application builder. Other than that, we are yet to find some other patterns. Got
it. And from your perspective, in terms of metrics, in terms of tipping point, is the number of stars that you get critical? Is there a critical a number of how big the community is that becomes valuable? Do you have a target in mind that you're trying to achieve right now, right? What is that North Star metric, if you will, right, for you to try and achieve, to say, okay, this will be a great place to be, and I think from there we will really explore.
Got it. So in my opinion, stars is it's more like a proxy, and it's a proxy for how much awareness you have created in the developer community about your project. Other than that, it doesn't mean anything. Like these are the people, they use it just like a like or a subscribe button. That's it. So it doesn't mean that these people are actively using your project or these people are actively contributing your project. They might have even forgot about it. So the actual metrics that everyone should be tracking should be the adoption and usage. For example, if it is something that can be installed, it can be the number of installations, and we can track how many of those installations are active. And that's the metric that we are trying to improve.
Got it. Any thoughts on, of course, there could be a vibrant community for projects and therefore companies, many people contributing to it, a rich, history of code changes and development. But, when it comes to slightly larger companies, what is that element that they are further looking for, right, from an open source project for them to try it or adopt it, right? I'm leaning towards using the word trust. Is it easier for them to trust this community, this project, right? Or do they do further due diligence or any other checks, right? Do they come and talk to you as the core maintainer or the CEO founder of this company and ask you certain specific questions? How is this balance, particularly for serious users who may be looking to pay for it in the short to medium term, right? And, either of you can, and maybe both of you should go for it. Harini, you were on the other side with BlackRock as a customer, from an evaluation and identification of projects perspective. What process did you go through?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, like the trust or the transparency of able to look at the code gives that kind of comfort level. And also I think open source as a concept itself that you can self-host is also good in the sense that you're not like trusting any random project or like developer with your data or your code. So you can maybe try out the product with your self-hosted kind of version if that's kind of your enterprise's demand, or with the hosted version, like the way we have set up ROI is that your data and your code continue to be on your cloud platform of choice. So effectively that kind of also is a way for tackling that enterprises or like the bigger customers who are very data sensitive to say that, hey, you can use ROI, but your data and code is actually on your own platform. So that also is a way that we are looking at solving that trust factor. And, it's a startup or, early stage companies that really is not typically at the top of mind. There are a lot of other problems that they need to solve for. So adoption on those levels at a hosted version is something we are seeing.
Navneet, your experience in, how do you build trust with, say, paying customers?
Got it. So as Harini said, the code being out in the public, it creates a lot of trust among developers. I mean, they can go through the code and they can make sure that it's not a project that's going to get abandoned. And for larger customers, they care a lot about the sustainability of the project. I mean, if they adopt something, it has to live for at least next 5 to 10 years, right? So I think adoption is the answer to that question. As in, if the product is or the project is adopted by very large organizations at very large scale, that creates a lot of trust for other organizations to adopt them.
Joseph, yeah, okay, go on.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the adoption from larger companies will create more trust for large enterprises to adopt something.
Understood. Got it. So large companies, they take the trust from the code base itself, transparency there, as well as the sustainability and the frequency with which the project is being maintained and improving.
Right.
Jose, welcome back. The question to you, I think we had an interesting conversation of monetization, right? And obviously it's a piece of the puzzle that you are trying to solve yourself, right? Using Avial monetization, what should when when should projects think about monetization? Is there right time to consider for monetization of open source projects? What is too early? What is too late? How do you think about that? And how should maintainers and founders think about that?
Yeah. So first of all,
Hey, Jos, your voice is breaking.
center, so I have using my mobile. It will stream it. I don't know what all stuff. Can you guys hear me now?
A little better. Let's try. Let's a little better. But otherwise, we'll go back to the others. Yeah, I think Joseph's network is a little flaky. Right. So same question for both of you. How do you think about monetization? Right. When is the right time? Do you give enough out for free upfront, build the trust for some time, and then slowly figure out monetization? Both timing of monetization, one, second, mode and method of monetization. Right. So would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I can go first. So, the way we are thinking about monetization is the life cycle of the natural progression of the product. So, there's always the free self-hosted version. We also have a hosted version that is also, there's a free tier, and we are introducing a pro beta version that effectively will launching monetization currently with more features that make logical sense on top of the free tier. So things like, things that need additional cloud infrastructure, like user management, multiple project support, or things that require you to deploy your cloud function somewhere that needs to be maintained. So those are things we are, exploring as a paid pro on top of the open source model. And I guess open source projects itself, there's a bunch of models that are well tested in the sense that there's the free open source with hosted version and services on top of the project. So those are some of the common ways. And this is the way we are thinking about it at ROE with additional value add on top of the open source project.
Got it. Navneet, same question to you with addition. Are you monetizing already?
Good question. So I will start with the other question, which is when should we start monetizing?
Sure.
So in a lifecycle of an open source project, it start off as a project, and then a lot of people come along, and there will be a community around the project. And then at that stage, the community is actually giving a lot of feedback, and we are improving the product, and we are still not still haven't reached product community fit. And after a while, we'll be having all the features that the community expects from the project. And after a while, we'll be having the product community fit. But even at that stage, it is not really ready for commercialization. I mean, it's okay for the community, but they might not pay for it. And only after this, it comes the product market fit. That is where the product is something that the people wants to pay for. Okay. And to talk about our commercialization, we do have paid customers, as in we have a SaaS model and we have a managed model. So we have Tooljet Cloud where people can just sign up and start using and play around with the product. So smaller companies who do not have enough resources to deploy something on their premises, they go for the cloud, which is SaaS. And for larger companies, they care a lot more about their data privacy and security. So they have to deploy on their premises. Okay, so for that, we have an enterprise edition, which comes with priority support, additional features like single sign-on, which makes sense to larger organizations. So our plan is that the community edition, which is free, it will be having all the features that a small company will use. And the enterprise edition will be having just the features that a large organization would expect. So we want to keep the difference between community edition and the enterprise edition very minimal. That's our commercialization plan.
Interesting. I think until Jose comes back, we'll continue the conversation on the track. Say, apart from the core community, which of course seems like the most important aspect of a project and therefore a company, right? Any other GTM channels, right? And outreach channels that you think are valuable outside of the community, right? To acquire more contributors and more importantly, to acquire customers, right? What do you think has worked for any of the better open source projects slash companies, and what are you also looking at, right? Anything outside of community?
So anything outside of community will be a paid channel, and we haven't explored that part yet. So right now we try to be very active wherever the developers hang out. It can be the conferences, it can be the meetups, it can be Reddit, Hacker News, etc. So we try to be active there.
Understood.
Yeah, as Navneet mentioned, like we are also like not doing any paid ones, more organic ones. And we're also like exploring a bunch of collaboration with other open source projects, which are like a natural fit because we are on the back end. So we are focusing on collaboration with a lot of front end focused open source projects that allows us to build like a complete app and demo and showcase. And we're also like working on things like templates that allows people to get started really quickly.
Complementary projects so that there is sort of relevance and you can build synergies and build on top of that and therefore get some momentum there.
Exactly.
Got it. Got it. I think, Navneet, you were mentioning about having close proximity to the core project to the enterprise use case as well, right? And identifying what use cases and what features to build into the project so that it can be ready for enterprises, etc. Right? This entire piece of getting feedback and then deciding a product roadmap is very different for the open source world as opposed to the closed source world. All right. And let's talk a little bit about that, of how to think about product prioritization, roadmap, features, because there, as the community grows, I would assume that there's just way too many requests. All right. And there has to be somebody somewhere who's able to prioritize and then allocate and distribute and then build it out in an ideal fashion, both for the project as well as for the company. So any thoughts on features, prioritization, roadmap would be very useful.
Got it. So we do have a public roadmap on GitHub. So for every feature request and for every bug, we'll be creating a GitHub issue and everything goes to the product roadmap. So we also have a developer relations team who owns this roadmap. So it's their duty to make sure the things that community needs are prioritized. So that's what we are following here. And since we are also a commercial open source company, we get a lot of requests from the users too. So we have to find some balance between everything.
Okay, just an add-on question to that. Is the public roadmap also your company roadmap?
That won't be possible in many cases. Like for example, the company roadmap will also involve commercial features, right? So those are not yet added to the public roadmap because they live in a separate repository.
Interesting. Okay, so you do have two roadmaps. There of course will be overlaps, but what the company requires from a paying customer perspective is something that is prioritized within the organization.
It depends. So sometimes there might be a feature request and the same person might be able to create a pull request for that. They'll just fix it. So someone wanted an integration with Mailgun and he actually created a pull request and merged it. So that's a good thing.
Got it. Got it. I think we have Joe's back, so we'll jump back to him for the previous question. Joe's thoughts on monetization. What should projects do, maintainers do to enhance monetization, right? Trigger monetization. What is the right time? What is the wrong time? Just let's talk a little bit about that. Also, we'll do a sound check first.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, a lot better. Super.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been working. Yeah. Anyway. So see, I think the first thing from my learning would be like making sure like you inform the community that down the line. I mean, at least you have to like have the well-informed roadmap in terms of conversation. So I mean, having it upfront always helps. Like things like change of license. Those things should be like I mean, if anyone actually want to like change it downline, that will have a lot of backlash. So having a long-term perspective in terms of how the project evolve, how we're gonna monetize it, should be very upfront. So what we have seen, a lot of projects start the basic support and service, because when it comes to open source projects, it all comes down to adoption, right? So people need to build the community, make sure there are users coming in, they're using it, right? So that, and helping them hand holding that bit, right? And once they adopt that to their to their stack or at their business, then they're definitely going to see value in terms of support. So we always think support is actually the the entry point in terms of figuring out whether people going to pay for this thing, and how much they're going to pay for it, right? Once you get that thing sorted is where like you have to decide, whether I gonna just stick to support and consulting, or like do have like spin off SaaS or open core, right? So that is still, that depends a lot about your perspective towards your project and how community or how users are using your stack, right? So I've seen people starting with open core, then realizing that's really really hard to, because see at open core you have to maintain two different repos, prioritizing what goes into one repo, what is a public community version gonna have, right? So what I've seen, like a lot of the folks has a SaaS version as starters. Then once you grow, you can always have an open core model, right? But then again, I don't think there is any. I don't think it comes down to the maintainer and the vertical you guys gonna fit in, right? Uh, so once you figure out that model, then it's all about like positioning yourself, right? So I interacted, I think in the last 6 months, interact with like 6 different competitor to Elassearch, all have different sub verticals, right? So the initial community you that come to you, and then like you feel like these guys see value, and if they want to pay for you, that's where you create these slice of verticals you want to go after, right? Is it actually big? Is it actually big customers, enterprise, or like SME, or like middle of the market, right? Once you figure out, then actually it's all about like figuring out what these guys need and grow. So figuring out these things like in first 3 to 6 months, then seeing like whether people gonna pay for smaller support or smaller features, that would be one of the best ways to like go to the commercial route.
Got it. Got it. Very interesting. Harini, back to you on the roadmap side of things. How do you think about the public roadmap, your own internal organization roadmap? What are the challenges there? How is this entire process managed of feedback from the community converting into something that is meaningfully deployed?
Yeah, so building product, it's hard, and especially if you're building open source project, you're on top of it adding this another layer of complexity of figuring out every feature, whether it fits with the open source model or the the closed source paid pro model. So that's the way we manage it is like obviously issues coming through GitHub, we kind of have like a prioritization of what makes sense in each cycle of release, and then we have our own pro features that we want to build on top of it for our the pro cloud hosted users. So as a small team, we're still in that early phase where as we have that extensions capability as well, where people can easily add people who are creating some issue can also solve their own problems by using code snippet. And our platform is also in a way fully codable. So essentially you can write any piece of code on top of it. So if someone is raising a feature missing issue in GitHub, we just guide them on ways we can actually solve for it without actually having to even contribute back, but because they can actually write cloud functions on top of it to solve their backend problems easily. So yeah, the way we solve it currently is not like not 100%. We're not like tackling all the issues that come through in the open source model as well. So yeah, we are still like figuring it out.
Got it. Just want to get all of your thoughts on the ideal resources for anybody starting a project or working on a project, right? Or to learn more about open source and just in general the approach, or thinking of building a startup using this approach, right? What are resources that they should sound out for? What should they read? Which community should they be part of? Right? Would love to get those thoughts. Also, on top of that, right? Which are the projects that one can learn about, that one can read about, that you think have done a stellar job of building great companies also? All right. So just getting, what are your inspirations in the open source world that have been great companies that have been built? Right. So both those questions sort of hand in hand, resources as well as, who do you look up to? who wants to go first? Arini, maybe you start.
Yeah, I mean, there are like literally so many resources. The choice paradox of like, where do we even go and start reading? There's like too many content out there. But like the few kind of newsletters that I follow that has like more curated, high quality content. One is like console.dev, which basically just in the developer tool space, what are the projects that are out there? Some open source, some not open source, but effectively that's a really good way for me to learn each week what's launching. GitHub Release Radar also has been really good, where you can actually track all of the different open source projects that are launching releases and what they're releasing. And obviously GitHub itself has like tons of developer relations, people who are focusing on this, and their channels, Twitter, etc. has been really resourceful overall.
And helpful. Navneet?
Yep. So I follow GitLab a lot. It's a company that followed the open core model, and it has been hugely successful. They write a lot about open source, about the licenses, commercialization, etc. So that's something I closely follow. And other than that, Hacker News is a great resource for open source projects in terms of discovery and also in terms of discussions. So almost all major open source projects, they release on Hacker News, and usually it goes really well. They get a lot of feedback and a lot of visibility. Other than that, Reddit, again, it's actually a very good resource when it comes to open source. The people, I mean, in most cases, the comments are really critical, but it's very helpful. And for people who are based in India, there are communities like FOSS United. They are very much active into open source and everything. So on a first glance, it might look like they are advocating just purely open source projects, I mean, free and open source projects. But I got a lot of help from the community, even though we were commercial open source.
Got it, got it. Just your headline views on the best tools out there, the best resources out there, which open source projects / companies do you think have the best playbooks to kind of learn from?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's embarrassing, but still, I'll just want to double check. Yeah.
No
So
worries.
I think definitely GitHub. GitHub is a role model for a lot of things. One, in the open code model, they have optimized that bit. Secondly, they have tons. I mean, they're like the first remote first company at scale, right? So, and they have pretty much open source a lot of the playbooks they have done. So, if you're open source company / remote work, I think GitHub is one place I've seen like great inspiration. Personally, in terms of community engagement, bigger companies, I think MongoDB is one entity we look up to a lot in terms of community engagement. So one of the things we learn, I missed out during our initial thing, is one is getting contribution, second getting recurring contribution from the same folks, right? So having the clear path of engagement is a very critical part for developers, and MongoDB has done a fantastic job on that bit. Coming back to what Navneet mentioned, Hacker News is a place where developers discover a lot of the projects. So iterating your message and getting that, so personally, I know Navneet, spend a lot of time on Hacker News, getting that thing on the first page. Right? That's very, very crucial and important. As I mean, a lot of the projects actually we speak to, I mean, for them, that's getting on the first page of Hacker News is the best validation for them, right? There are people out there who gonna use your project, right? So definitely, I would definitely vouch for, because getting your message is very important. I've seen people, doing multiple iterations before, the community sort of, able to relate to your project and, take off, right? So getting the buy-in from hacker community is actually very critical. And at times it's controversial, you get backfired, but but then again, you have to keep iterate and figure out what works for the community, right? Coming back to one other, so Nadia Iqbal is one of the individuals I follow a lot. She had written a lot about open source community. There is this Amazon book, Building in Public, written by her, which talks about a lot of issues and a lot of experience people have done. So, just to understand the problems and just to understand what are the things, what are the available solution right now, I think Nadia is actually one of the go-to person. So yeah, I think that's mostly my learning and the place where I follow. And just to at the end, like just to plug in, uh, uh, all the projects we onboard, we have an engagement bar, we have a first contributor. So if you guys want to start somewhere, always come to our projects, right? So I just got to plug in that bit.
Awesome, absolutely, absolutely. So we'll put all the links that you guys have suggested in terms of people to follow and sources to follow for the audience to check out later. We will put it in the group and on social media. Thanks for that. Right. Just the other question that keep coming on, and we can also, of course, take audience questions if anybody's in the audience wants to ask anything. Right, please feel free to type it, and we will take that. But okay, I think somebody's here, so. Mayur has put his hand up, so we'll directly go to Mayur for that. Mayur, why don't you ask the question?
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. So I think both of Navneet and Harini mentioned that there will be some pro features which people will ready to pay for, right? But I have a question on that. Like, have you faced a scenario where community contributors also contributed for those paid features? Like they have raised a merge request or something for those paid features, and how you manage that, if yes?
All right, so I have a perfect example for this. So recently, one of the contributors actually created an issue for OpenID Connect, which is supposed to be a build feature. And he also went ahead and created a pull request for it. But we had to reject it because it has a conflict with our product plans, right? Also, we have been always upfront that we are a commercial open source company, and the pull requests or feature requests that are in conflict with our commercial plans, they will be rejected.
Okay, that will be rejected in your repositories, but they might take the source code and implement and maintain it on their side, right?
Yeah, that's the beauty of open source. They can create a fork and they can do whatever and push it. And it's free to redistribute.
Got it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mayur, and thanks, Navneet, for the answer. Right. Broader question is where are we in terms of evolution of all of this from an India perspective? Of course, all of you have a connection here, right? Harini, you're building out of Australia, but I'm sure you're leveraging your India network as well. Navneet, you're of course building yours, likewise yours, right? Do we have any specific advantages building out of India for open source, or any other specific challenges as opposed to the rest of the world? How do you guys see that?
I can talk from my limited experience, but interestingly, I was following the most fastest growing open source startups, and many of them actually are from India. So that's a really exciting development. But most of the open source projects are not like specifically built for a region. They're targeting generally global day one in a way. So even though there might be adoptions because of some local networks and pockets, because you're maybe doing some talks and things like that, but overall the products core adoption is typically global from the beginning. That's what I feel.
Nothing.
Naveen, you will go, or like, should I just plug in?
Sorry?
I think someone is speaking.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I agree to Harini totally, and we should be building globally. And I cannot think of a specific advantage that we got by being here.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. I think open source projects are day zero global. So, it doesn't matter where you are. And if there is a definite valid use case, people can adopt you, right? So, yeah, so then that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, we have a question in the group. It says, I think, what motivates OSS contributors to pick one or two of the projects from the multiple open source projects out there? How do companies incentivize their contributors? Any thoughts on that? There are specific other approaches of the company, incentivizing contributors other than the project itself?
Yeah, I think in most of the
Or do you
cases,
think that changes how contributors pick projects, if at all it does?
got it. So in most cases, it is the users themselves who are contributing back to the project. So that's one incentive for them. In one way, it is like they are donating something to the product that they use regularly. In other way, they are adding the feature that they miss on the product. So that's definitely one thing. And uh, how do we pick from the CEO of a lot of open source projects? So that's definitely interesting. So one thing is that a lot of people create issues, but whenever there's a pull request, there won't be enough resources to actively review them. So what developers want is that, let's say they created a pull request, they want it to be reviewed at the earliest. So sometimes I created a pull request for one of the connectors for Snowflake, and the pull request stayed there for around 4 months. So that's something that is very demotivating, and this is something people should actively look for, like how active is the review process when they are looking for contributing to an open source project.
Yeah, and also I think the way to install or get set up and get the process of development set up going, it should be more frictionless and then not a lot of steps involved. So very simple infrastructure part of things as well. So that kind of allows more developers to start, not be intimidated by the project and get started. And interesting on the other side of the things that, obviously these big companies, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and all of them have open source projects and dedicated teams working on the open source project itself. So they're incentivizing by hiring full-time developers to continue that evolution, and that those projects continue to be more adopted or engaged, because as Navneet mentioned, the response cycle is much more compared to, say, a smaller project which has less number of maintainers, and it's a bit of a struggle.
Makes sense. I think the contribution of the larger companies in keeping the projects really active and really growing is also critical to the ecosystem.
Exactly.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think just to add the last bit, I still have contributions, but see, we at Avial, we predominantly work with maintainers, identifying problems and work on it. Right? So this has been a problem, and we are shipping out a feature which is more like a enhanced version of GitHub issues, where others can say, what, I want XYZ and be willing to pay X amount of money for that, right? So it's like GitHub issues, but on top of that, actually you can put bounties on top of that. So we are shipping that feature, and the way we see it, the request can come from either the projects or even from users, right? So a lot of times, like now we mentioned, that particular user, he made a issue, right? But the overall the project cannot do that, but someone from the community can pick it up and create a fork and ship it out, right? So we think there's a ton of value unlocking the community in terms of contributing back to the project. And if there's a way to actually pay them, we want to be be part of that journey.
Got it. Interesting. Very interesting perspective. Any other questions in the audience? Otherwise, we're well past the hour mark. We have a couple of questions from my side, but I'll see if there are any questions from the audience yet. Probably not. Okay. Yeah, just a couple of last questions. All right. All of you are raising capital, right? Any thoughts on how, and Harini interestingly has been on the other side of the table as a VC also, right? So would love to get your thoughts on how the venture capital world is looking at this ecosystem. What has your experience been, right? Positive, neutral, growing, negative, right? Please share some thoughts on capital raising for the open source world.
Yeah, so interestingly, obviously there are tons of different VCs with different focuses. And what interesting, just coming from my previous experience being in the VC space, is that some VCs understands the developer tool space and open source models, and some don't. And sometimes VCs try to bucket open source projects in the same kind of growth channels and categories of retention and all that as a SaaS product. So the lens with which they evaluate these projects has to shift slightly. And there are obviously some VCs who understands and focus on this space more deeply. But just overall, general observation is that people, the VCs are tending to shift more and more and understand this space and explore this as an investment in the earlier stages.
Good note for us to improve on. Navneet?
Yep. So when we started fundraising, we wanted the VC to understand how open source works and should also understand that it's a long-term game. It's not like we can start monetizing from day one or month one. So we wanted someone who understands that. And currently in the ecosystem, it's very hard to find VCs who understands this. So everyone keeps asking about monetizing first. I mean, I totally agree that for a business to become VC investable, it should have a path to monetization. It might not be in the first year or second year or third year. So we need more people who understands that.
Fair insight, fair insight. Jos, your experience of and just
So I think I have like aggregate what Harini and Navneet mentioned. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
I have to check that. All right.
Yeah,
So just to so just to aggregate what Harini and Navneet mentioned. Yes, there is still a like a huge shortage of VCs who understand it, because it's still monetization of scalable monetizable communities coming out of open source still like I would say like day one or day two. So because of that, there are only very few operators who understand the space, and everyone want to like jump in, like Hadi mentioned, like people are still looking at open source companies are the same lens of SaaS, right? Which won't really help the community or the investor. So that is definitely a shortage. But I think what really at least in last 6 months or so, I see, and actually last 1 year or so, I see like a lot more people trying to have at least one partner specializing on it, because they see this is actually the way a lot more companies going to get built, right? So that is actually a fantastic change. One other bit, and this is still going to be like, around what we think, and this is actually more like our hypothesis. It's the fact that a lot of the maintainers who have a very powerful open source or a very popular open source project still doesn't want to take the VC money, because for them, they want to grow at their own pace, right? They don't want to actually, promise growth for them. So we are still very early, but we are still exploring things like Web3, where so there's a famous tweet by Balaji where he says, if you're open source, maintainer, just launch a token and let the community buy your success and take it from there, right? So we are sort of getting inspired by a lot of those things. So we think as we right now, if you look at Web 2 and Web 3 projects, they're still, even though there are open source, they still don't talk to each other. There's still a lot of unresolved tension, I would say. So we think as we evolve, I think there will be a lot more overlaps, because the thing that actually really inspires me is the fact that with the Web3 tokenomics, you can actually keep the community while you grow as a project, right? I don't think I have seen any models where keeping the community and scaling sort of works. So I think we are working with couple of early projects where we think down the line they'll also launch their token for the community and even use as a ways to raise capital, right? It's very controversial, but I think somebody has to take it. So that's where we are going.
No, very cool and interesting thought, food for thought for everybody, and what you're trying to see that overlap between Web 2 and Web 3, right? Somewhere there is that fundamental of open source believes in community, right, and distributed approach to solving problems, and somewhere Web 3 also says the same thing. Maybe there's an overlap. Maybe that's a way to better monetize. Maybe that's a way to raise capital. Right, it might run us out of business, but maybe that's still an opportunity. Right, very exciting to see.
But Arjun, I don't think actually VCs won't go away. That's the way I see it. Like, they're going to evolve, right? So if you have seen, in the last 6 months, a lot of the traditional VCs have set up Davos, right, as a venture DAO where actually they can invest out, right?
True.
So I think the model going to evolve. The best thing going to happen, the model will have more and more
players coming in, and there'll be less gatekeeping, and there'll be more signals coming from the community, right? That's the way I see this evolving, right now. You guys actually let's say a new product that comes out, you have to sit out and research and figure out that bit, right? But if there is a way where actually you can see the signal right out, that helps, right? So that's the way we see things evolving. uh, I don't think these are not going away. It's been a 500 plus, or not owns a VC, private equity, or it's a much evolved process. But I think technology will have a much stronger play along with community. That's the way I see this evolving.
No, that's a fair point. We all need to evolve, otherwise, we'll die. As simple as that. Super. Final thoughts, right? I'll leave this. Thank you so much, all of you. But final thoughts, each of you, just if you want to give one parting thought on what you're super excited about for the future of open source and what you're building, and just give a shout out to what you're building as well. And for people who may want to join you, I'm sure all of you are hiring, right? One final thought, all of you, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, super excited to be building in open source, and also a company on top of it that allows that culture or that spirit of experimenting, evolving, and growing with the developer community. And so like with Roy, we are kind of wanting to be in that space of modern backend development, allowing you to build and get started like no code, but continue to scale anytime you need. So we are, super excited by what we are building, and obviously we are hiring as well. So yeah, check us out, join us on our website or Discord community.
Super. Navneet.
Yeah, so we have been building in the public for around 1 year. I mean, just 1 year. So meanwhile, we work with a lot of people from different parts of the world. We collaborate on different features, etc. And we have also hired a lot of amazing folks. So we are hiring for a lot of roles. Like we need product people, we need developer evangelists, and we need product developers. So please feel free to refer anyone if you feel he or she will be a right fit.
Awesome. Just
Yeah, so for me, I need more folks like Navneet and Harni joining this revolution. I think that's the best thing I can ask for. And if you guys need any help, at AVL, we want to help you guys actually, enhance or grow your community, right? So that's my wish. If you're out there, like if you want to start a project, something that's more like your reach, it might even start as a small library, but trust me, if there is a community around you like that can take off. So be a maintainer. It's painful, but it's worth it, right? So just go and do that.
awesome. Super awesome. Hey, thank you so much, all the panelists, Harini, Navneet, and Jos, for joining us today and sharing your deep insights. Right, very exciting to see what all of you are building, and wish you guys all the very best. And hope to have maybe a part 2 of the session, let's say in a year or so, and see how the evolution has happened, both of your companies and the ecosystem. We're super excited to see more of this. And as Speciale, we are looking for more and more companies in the domain, right? So please hit us up as well. All right. All the very best. Thanks all the audience as well for joining us in this session, and hope to do more of this once again. Signing off from Speciale Talks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye.